Has the state been making decisions for you against your will? Has the state told you who you can and can't be in a relationship with? Has the state told you whether you can or cannot have sex? Has the state told you whether you can or cannot have children? If you've experienced any of the above, and therefore feel that you are not considered to have the full legal subjectivity you deserve, please call the PPI claim line on 0800 Resilience. Here at Providing People with Information, we are preparing a legal challenge for the Mental Capacity Act, which we believe is based heavily upon the outdated liberal legal subject model and want to see a shift in focus towards the forward-thinking, socially contextualised vulnerability theory proposed by Martha Feynman. Here at PPI, we realise that by relying upon the liberal legal subject, the English legal system still functions upon a political ideology from the 17th century proposed by hugely influential thinkers such as John Locke and Jeremy Bentham. As Anne Scales explains, liberalism assumes that every individual holds certain common characteristics. As such, the liberal legal subject is seen as being a self-interested, sovereign adult who is rational, autonomous, masculine, and formally equal before the law. Here at PPI, we know that basing a judicial system upon the liberal legal subject is hugely problematic. If you have answered yes to any of the above questions, you have been a victim of the system stripping you of your embodied particulars in order to appear neutral. As such, you have been completely socially decontextualised. As Penner suggests, you have had certain important individual characteristics ignored, concealed, and discounted. PPI is of the opinion that you are being treated as inferior, marginal and different when being compared to a decontextualised norm that is so narrowly defined. This is a sneaky non-neutrality of the law, which has crept into all areas of jurisprudence, including the Mental Capacity Act, as will now be explained.
The legal landscape in this area is governed by the Mental Capacity Act 2005. It promised a sea change in the relationship between people with mental disabilities and the legal system. At its heart lie 5 key principles. First, everyone has a capacity unless it is established that he lacks capacity. 2, all practicable steps to help a person make a decision must be taken. 3, inability to decide is not the same as an unwise decision. 4, anything done under the Act must be in his best interests. 5, anything done under the Act must be done in the least restrictive manner. This seems to advance the rights of people with mental disabilities. However, it is Section 3, with its tests for legal capacity, where the Act can be criticised for reinforcing the concept of the liberal legal subject. The test considers the ability to understand the information, to retain that information, to use or weigh that information, and to communicate his decision. Here at PPI, we disagree with this test. Whilst this functional approach can be said to be progress, critics such as Dana argue that by including a test, this is where the attention is focused, rather than helping people achieve capacity. However, the Act also has its supporters. The House of Lords Scrutiny Committee into the Mental Capacity Act endorsed the Act, saying that it was helping people to achieve autonomy before the law. At PPI, we suggest that the House of Lords have got this wrong. Andy will now explain how the Section 3 test works in action.
An example of the Mental Capacity Act being applied with an unsatisfactory outcome can be seen in Judge Headley's decision in a local authority in H. H was a 29-year-old female with mild learning difficulties and atypical autism who had displayed an early and deep degree of sexualisation and exhibited disinhibition, which included willingness to engage in sexual acts with strangers. It was noted that H had no difficulty in communicating, however, her capacity to consent to sexual relations must be assessed using the test in Section 3. In his decision, Judge Headley noted that sexual acts are complex processes and linked to moral and emotional components. Both were held to be important elements of sexual relations, but had no part in a test of capacity. As Andy has just highlighted, The Mental Capacity Act must be decided apart from specific persons or situations. By following the test to the letter, Judge Headley found that H lacked capacity based on her inability to understand the health risks of sexual relations and that she could not use the information she had to make an effective decision. As a result of failing the test, H was subjected to one-on-one supervision for 24 hours a day. Short of a decision by the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, the law will continue to remain in an unsatisfactory position of excessive restrictions of liberty on those who do not fit the norm of the liberal legal subject. We at PPI believe an alternative approach would be more suitable.
Martha Fineman's vulnerability theory is, we believe, a forward-thinking approach enabling individuals to exist in a society where they are subject to the substantive equality we each deserve. Viewing everyone as an equal vulnerable being, Feynman defines this within the scope of the embodied and embedded being. We are all embodied in our natural state as vulnerable beings, equally susceptible to harm, within which we are also embedded into the institutional relationships within society. Neither is optional. It is in fact, Feynman argues, our resilience that differs, and here is where state intervention comes into play. Reconceptualising the role of the state requires, according to Feynman, that we imagine responsive structures whereby state involvement actually empowers a vulnerable subject. Feynman's vulnerability theory is described by Beverly Clough as at the forefront of reconceptualising the meaning of vulnerability. With reference to sexual consent, Clough argues the current judicial approach takes a narrow, individualised stance which obscures many of the situational and relational dynamics which interact and shape the landscape of consent to sexual relationships. It is this approach, we argue, by its nature restricts agency of the individual, as seen in the application of the Mental Capacity Act in A. Local Authority versus H. Should the current judicial system adopt a more substantive approach to equality through the vulnerability theory, the focus would not have been on restricting H's consent to partake in sexual activity, but rather how H could acquire the resilience to understand and consent to the act in question, the state supporting her to do so and partake in such activities safely. By building H's resilience through the medium of state intervention, this would have, as Monroe describes, created vital mechanisms whereby an individual can accumulate the resilience or resources they need to confront the social, material and practical implications of their vulnerability. We argue that Feynman's vulnerability theory approach, with the emphasis on state intervention, would enable a more person-specific analysis of circumstances in relation to capacity, potentially minimising the need and ability for courts to restrict freedoms.
PPI agrees with an alternative approach, a paradigm shift from the medical model to the social approach. This approach places an obligation on states to ensure your rights are fully accessible, an approach which says no to the traditional model and instead yes to finding a solution that works for you, as seen in the vulnerability theory. Then welcome your new best friend, Article 12, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which fights for your equal recognition before the law. Article 12.1 highlights the importance of universal legal capacity, which gives the individual status as a legal subject, regardless of the level of rationality in their decision-making process. This challenges the idea of the liberal legal subject and embraces the human difference. 12.2 acknowledges legal capacity shouldn't be restricted to your mental capacity. It states states should take positive steps to help enable you to have full legal capacity. And 12.3 recognises that individuals rely on others to make decisions and require support in various ways. This presents a challenge to the individualised approach proposed under the MCA. This convention is largely linked to Fredman's approach, which highlights that the issue is not the difference in people's embodiment, but the detriment attached to those differences. We recognise a full spectrum of human diversity and the ability this should be recognised and accommodated under the law. It can also be associated with Martha Fineman's vulnerability theory, where state intervention would bolster the resilience of individuals with mental disabilities to enable them to understand and make decisions in situations such as those highlighted previously. Here, at PPI, we recognise that the liberal legal subject is no longer a viable cornerstone for our legal system. We are equally vulnerable and all require support to reach decisions. We are fighting to see a change in approach whereby you have the full legal subjectivity you deserve and your decisions are respected as being final. If your rights and freedoms have been denied,
Don't delay, call PPI today.